Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Musical Innertube. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane. You know, Don's had quite a career in radio and television, where he's been an air personality, a news anchor, even a TV weatherman.
And John has been a college professor. He's written several books, and he's been an editor and features writer at the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper.
We first teamed up for a radio show in college. On one show, we introduced a soothing musical interlude.
But we stumbled, and it came out Musical Innertube.
And that became the name for this podcast, where we talk with interesting people about their interesting lives, difference makers who really make a difference.
I've had the privilege in my life of seeing Groucho Marx live on stage twice. Once was in the early 70s when an 80-something-year-old Groucho stood behind a podium at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in Los Angeles and told stories with a musical accompaniment by Marvin Hamlish. And the second time was a few years ago in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, when Groucho was on stage cavorting. And it was this man who we're talking to today, Frank Ferrante, who smeared some grease paint on and became Groucho Marx. And you can see him do that on your local PBS station this month as it airs Frank Ferrante's Groucho, An Evening with Groucho. Frank, welcome to the Musical Innertube.
Thank you. Thank you, Don. Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
It's really great to have you. And of course, I've seen Frank do Groucho several times, and I really have enjoyed him in a range of plays here on the East Coast, including an especially uproarious version of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, which I thought was one of the, wildest things I've seen on the stage. But there were others. There was a play about your show of shows where I think you were Sid Caesar in that one. Am I correct?
That's right. That was Neil Simon's Laughter on the 23rd Floor. And I played Max Prince, who's the Sid Caesar inspired character, the great comedian. And it all takes place in the writer's room with the ilk of Mel Brooks and Neil Simon and Woody Allen. It's I love doing that show. I directed that as well, and that's at the Walnut Street Theater. And I think you've been subjected to more of my work than any writer should have to be. But I think I also did one. The last one I did there was with Ken Ludwig, the great farce master. Actually, you referred to me as farce master Frank Ferrante, but that was a comedy of tenors, which I also directed and performed. I love doing farce, actually, and when it's done well, there's nothing quite as exciting. And I think within a couple of year period, I think there were 5 pieces that I did that in that area in Philadelphia, Bucks County area, and such a beautiful tradition of theater there and history.
The Walnut Street Theater, where you've done those performances and where John saw you, was a place where Groucho performed back in the 20s, right?
That's right. Perhaps the greatest success the Marx Brothers had was in Philadelphia at the Walnut Street Theater when they performed a show called Alsatias, which was actually was broken in Allentown at what was then the Lyric Theater. I'm not sure what it's called now, but it's still there. They did a few days there, and then they went to the Walnut that following week, and still have the record for the longest run at the Walnut Street Theater. And the Walnut Street Theater has been around since 1809, so the most continuous weeks. It was the success. Again, those Philly audiences are amazing. The success of that run catapulted them to Broadway, their first Broadway run of ever, before Coconuts and Animal Crackers. And that really had a lot to do with that community, that theater community. And I still feel that when I go back there. When I do those one-nighters, and John, you've seen me do them, and you can sell over 1,000 seats on a Monday night, and it feels like a rock concert. And it has a currency, the show, and that's why I like doing the role, because of the improv nature of it. Groucho, it's innately, it's a surprise. He was surprising. We didn't know what he was going to say or do next. And I try to conjure that effect, with my Groucho performances. And most of the work that is interact, even A Funny Thing Happened on the Forum, which was so fun to do. And I was so proud of that. I thought we did the best we could do with that show. And I was so happy that the audiences loved it. And, the media liked it. It's nice when it all comes together and people just want to go and have a good time. And I did a lot of cross casting. At that time I had men playing women's roles and vice versa. And it was a fairly diverse cast. We had a a person of color for Miles Gloriosus. I was proud of how all of that played out, but mostly I was proud that it was funny and I had great actors. I had carte blanche in terms of casting. I can go to Philadelphia, New York. So mostly Philadelphia talent, which is a very deep pool, as you know, John. It's just an uproariously fun piece to do. When and to sing Sondheim, I've never sung Sondheim before, and so there I was singing. But part of the fun is that as Zero Mostel did, you can take to the audience. There were just a sprinkle of improvisation to give it a real buoyancy and surprise factor.
Frank, often I've noticed, and I don't know how you choose your moments, but you've got great timing, of course. But you tear down the fourth wall and just start talking to the audience, right? I've seen it a couple of times. You did that in your Groucho show. You also did it in Funny Thing, and I'm just wondering, do you know when you're going to do that? Have you done it on the fly before? Oh, yeah, actually, you did it on Laughter also, and I'm just wondering. It's wonderful to do because I think it reminds everybody that they're there seeing a show, which is part of the fun, that here I am, I'm Groucho. And now here I am, I'm a guy playing Groucho, getting you to join the fun. And I just love that thing. And I'm just wondering if that's just something you do, when you're going to do it, or does it just strike you as sort of like a malign spirit and say, hey, let's do this now? I'm just wondering.
It's honestly, it's a combination, John. Sometimes I know the areas that I'll improvise. I won't know what improv I'll be doing. Sometimes it's right off the cuff. With a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. That's a burlesque. That's a vaudeville. It's so interesting. Sondheim loved that show. It was the first show, as you know, that he did lyrics and music for. He was so proud of it. I was fascinated to read that he would go to see amateur productions, school productions, because he just loved that show and it meant so much to him. But back to your question, for a show like An Evening with Groucho, it's also designed for improv and interaction. Sometimes I'll just go nuts. And sometimes the tougher the crowd, and the crowd's, meaning it's not giving me the response that I want. That's when I find the most interesting material. And I've learned. I love performing before all audiences. I never blame the audience. A lot of performers do. I don't. My job is to convert them. And if I'm playing in Florida for a 2:00 matinee, I have to understand that these are people in their 70s, 80s, 90s who aren't going to be rambunctious. And so my job is to still find a way to groove and to navigate the performance and also try to do it for myself. I go out and I'll work that front row of seniors and try to elicit some kind of response, and new material will come out. I'm also seeing, on the other hand, on the other side of the coin, young people show up for these shows. When I was in Seattle for 3 summers, there were 20-somethings from the university that were showing up, and I have no idea why, except the fact that Groucho has an eternal quality, that he's irreverent and he's edgy and hip still. And somehow the word was getting out, and I think it could be the weekly papers that play to a younger crowd, papers now online. But so to answer your question, the improv is a fascinating thing. I mean, we all have our secrets. We're like interactive comics are like magicians. You don't want to give away all, but there are improv moments, John, that I use over and over again that are in my pocket in the file. But I'm always looking for new ones. And if I find a great one, it may come back. But I really delight in discovering new improv. And it's not set. Laughter on the 23rd Floor was a set book show. I don't it feels like it's improv, but it's not, because of the nature of the subject matter, comedy and comedy writing. But that's a strict show, like all those Simon shows need to be. To me, they have to be extremely precise. Every move, every syllable. And quite frankly, if you have 7 out of 9 actors who are great at it, that's not going to do. You need 9 actors who kill it for it to go from good to great. And that's hard to find these days, because his work it's happening right now with Plaza Suite on Broadway with Sarah Jessica Parker and Matthew Broderick. They're period pieces. There's a certain language to it, and actors don't always know the rhythms, how quickly that dialogue needs to spark. It's all fascinating to me. There's a lot of science to it, and I enjoy staging them, and I'm grateful to Philadelphia for giving me the opportunity as the Walnut, and for people like you, John, who recognize that, oh, this is something a little special. This is different than maybe we're going to get elsewhere. And the truth of the matter is, we're in a tough business on stage, and we need spotlighting. I do so much of my own because who does it this day? I don't have a publicist or a manager or an agent. You want certainly your audience to recognize you and hopefully come back, but it helps to have advocates in the arts and the media too. That makes a difference. It makes a difference to my work. That way you don't feel like you're working in a vacuum. And the truth of the matter, you want as many people to be exposed to certain entertainment as possible. I want young people to go, what the hell was that? I want to go read about it. I want to see more shows. I want to see solo shows. I want to go see more clowning. Maybe I want to do that. And that is something that has happened in my life at this stage after over 35 years, to have some young person go, I saw your show in 1995 in Kansas City, and I went into the theater.
No kidding.
That's satisfying. Or I wanted to go into the circus, or I wanted to go into the arts, and I get that. And there's something quite, it's exhilarating comedy, and particularly improv comedy. And I was exhilarated when I was a boy, when I was watching the Marx Brothers.
Yeah, and in that Groucho show, Frank, I've seen it, and I've seen the video that PBS is running now. You do go out in the audience, but I would say that almost reflects on a part of Groucho's career back when he was doing the game show, You Bet Your Life, and interviewing people. You had that same sort of thing where you'll pick somebody out of the front row of the audience and do a back and forth interview with them.
That's true. I have the advantage of this kind of 72-year career of Groucho's to look back on. I have hindsight on my side. So the show that's on PBS, which I'm so proud of because it's the culmination of 37 years of doing that show since college. It's the culmination of over 3,000 performances. It's the culmination of over 500 cities and probably millions of people who've seen it worldwide. And now it's captured on film and will be on PBS for years. And it will be overseas broadcast on airplanes and PBS streaming. And, to me, as a stage guy, it's a surreal experience. Completely surreal. I keep thinking I need to be at every channel, every station that's broadcasting it to promote it, to entertain, because I'm used to doing one-nighters around the world. And every one of those jobs has been hard earned. So now it's just happening. It's in New York. It's in Los Angeles. It's in Paducah. It's insane. Someone in Fairbanks, Alaska is watching it the same night as someone in New York City. That really is pleasing. But to get back to your comment, Don, it's my fantasy. It's a fantasia. The show itself is storytelling, songs, improv, Groucho one-liners and bits, of course, but the interaction is very reminiscent of You Bet Your Life, when he would kind of almost warmly kibitz and then go in for the kill here and there and string along the contestants on that show, his victims or participants. And I've learned from him. I was listening to hours and hours of You Bet Your Life on radio and realized how fluid and contemporary his mind is. It works today. But when you listen to hours and hours of it, you go, oh, he has a contemporary mind. He's so loose and free and fluid. That's the word, because he knows where to go. He goes with where he needs to go. It's a beautiful thing. So the show that you'll see that John, you've both seen, but the film version's interesting because, Hamilton, they have millions of dollars to record that show, and it's a beautiful show. And of course, I love that piece. Who doesn't, right? But our little show that could was shot at the Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park, which to me was beautiful. It's a 2-time Tony Award-winning venue. It's in the Midwest, and that's where I started. In Kansas City, I got my first job, and I always loved audiences in the Midwest. There's no judgment. They give you a lot of love, and which I think is a terrific thing. I just finished Chicago with that. It's same type of experience where they're rooting for you. But with the way this is shot, it's a 3-camera shoot, and the director's Drea Weber, who also edited the piece beautifully. And so, but the great thing about this show, it's not a traditional straight-on proscenium shoot. The theater, the stage is an extreme thrust. So the audience is around me. So Drea, with a handheld camera, can literally walk behind me and capture me going into the audience, prowling around. And so it's an unusual hybrid. It doesn't feel like it's really difficult to transfer a stage show to the screen, I think. And more than not, I think they fail. But I think this show gives a good sense of what it's like to be there live. And going back to your comment, Don, that's important because of the intimate back and forth quality of the piece. So I need to be Groucho in vaudeville, a young Groucho. Oh, Mr. Gallagher, what's on your mind this morning, Mr. Sheen? I have to have that kind of energy. Sometimes I'm doing old Groucho in the show. First, I would like to take a bow for Harpo and Chico. I'm middle-aged Groucho, and you bet your life. The improv was devised in a way so you don't have to know who Groucho is, because the improv works whether you know who Groucho is or not. And then you come along for the education and the kind of just the whimsy of his presence.
Having an established character like Groucho, there are several times in that, and it does harken back to, for example, in some of the interviews he does in You Bet Your Life, where he just looks at the audience. Somebody hands him a line and he looks and raises the eyebrows, and you know what's going through his head. And that's in the show too, where you can give an expression and just do a little smile and a wink of the eyebrows, and everybody knows what Groucho should be saying or is thinking at that time.
Oh, that's so true. Well, that's some of my best. That's some of my favorite moments, because it requires the least amount of effort in a way, which is just to respond, which is what we're taught. Listen and respond. And often the audience is much funnier than any performer can ever be, because it's so honest and true and in the moment. I love that. And you're right. I love doing takes. I grew up studying all of those comics of that era, and they're certainly not of our era, but we love them, those of us of a certain vintage. Jack Benny was a hero of mine. Just studying Jack Benny's timing, it's remarkable. And so I ingested all of that from the time I was 9. So those rhythms are in me, the timing's in me, the sounds are with me. But I loved all of it. But then again, I love the comedians of that I grew up with in the 70s. I loved Mel Brooks and Peter Sellers and Woody Allen, and these were heroes.
Well, I think the 70s was an amazing time, as all of us can attest, because in that decade, there was, for several years, a real nostalgia thing, where suddenly the films of the 30s that people hadn't seen for generations came back into prominence, partly because I think of copyright issues, but a lot of the Marx Brothers movies started, new runs and new prints. But to see when the Groucho, when we were growing up, like when we were little kids, they were on TV, and then to see their movies again, a lot of them I had never seen before. I remember the first night I ever saw Duck Soup, and it changed me. I mean, I'm not even joking. I mean, it has haunted me. It's so funny and so anarchic, right? It's almost like nobody knows themselves on the set what's going to happen. That whole sequence, making fun of Paul Revere's ride, where Harpo ends up in bed with a horse. And the entire scene starts with a pan of the bottom of the bed, where you see a set of shoes and then a set of horseshoes.
Suggestion that they are creatures. They're not of our rules and world and realm. It was always there. Groucho to me is a superhero. He is not. He's on his own frequency. The Marx Brothers are on their own frequency, obviously, and they're they've landed on our planet, and they're going to and infiltrate. But I agree. I found them exhilarating. I found their humor addicting. Obviously, I'm still to the point where I wanted to be part of that world specifically, but also wanted to be in comedy, the comedy arts, whatever you want to call it, the theater. I wanted to be part of storytelling and imagination, and that's what I do. I'm fortunate that I have this through line with this particular role. I'm proud of it, because I respect the solo. I'm crazy about the solo historical form, and I always talk about. I'm always referencing Hal Holbrook's Mark Twain. Hal was a friend of mine in the last 8 years. He passed away a year ago at 90, almost 96. And I was studying that form when I was a boy, putting together the Groucho as a college project, and I was discovered at USC by Groucho Marx's son when I put on the first version of this Groucho show. And that's how that was my entree. And then he hired me. And then within a year, we were in New York. I was in New York and London playing my hero, Groucho Marx, on stage. So in Arthur Marx's show, which was called Groucho, A Life in Review, I played Groucho from age 15 to 85 in that. So when you talk about seeing him in Los Angeles at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, I think about old Groucho and Groucho at Carnegie Hall. But I loved him. He was a father figure, a grandfather figure to so many of us. It's the grandfather you wanted, really, in a way. And he was armor for so many of us shy kids. The kids that went into the arts, into journalism, into acting, because we're looking for a way to express ourselves. And here was a fearless beast named Groucho Marx who said, you can do this. The world is different. You can see it differently. And great artists, great comic artists, I think, take us there. He took me there, and I've been able to do so much beyond certainly that role that I never expected from this character, the Caesar character that I've been doing for 20 years, which is very much burlesque and vaudeville in the Cirque realm, to being able to approach Simon Peace, as you've seen me do, because of the George S. Kaufman influence, who wrote for the Marx Brothers.
I have to repeat something we were talking about just before the show. Whereas Frank has movies of himself doing the Groucho Marx walk with an imaginary cigar through his living room, so do I. I have that too, and it's partly because Groucho seemed to just blow the roof off. There seems this freedom. It made you feel that anything was possible. That that it almost you use the word Superman, and I know what you mean. That there was this sense that through language, through physical humor, through satire, right? And he always said that they never did social commentary, but it came out being that way a lot of times. If to war, the country's gonna go. Oh, Heidi, 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 ho. It's still, I think, one of the great anti-war films ever. And help is on. So I just think I remember that power of Groucho Marx to give kids, who are 9 and 10 and 11 and 12, this huge rush. Really, that's all I can think of to call it.
Right. And I've met a lot of these, I've traveled so often and to so many places, John and Don, and I meet these people. I'm on the younger end of, I was 11 during that 9, 10, 11, when he was making this comeback, had this renaissance. And I've met so many people, my peers and older, who remember him well. And when he passed, we cried. Literally, I remember that night putting a pillow over my head and crying. I've spoken to dozens and dozens of my peers who've said the exact same thing to me. I thought I was the only one. I know a friend of mine who was 10 when he passed away, great opera singer. He said, "Are you kidding? I lost it." And we didn't expect that because we couldn't separate that artist from the man. It was Superman. It was like age was his kryptonite, I loved. And you don't just like them; you either love them or not.
Right. And when you were talking about his renaissance in the 70s, when the movies did come back, that's when I was in college. That's where I got hooked. There was a kid who had a 16 millimeter projector, and he would show the old films in his dorm room on a sheet. And in order to, we had a little group going, and it wasn't a formal group, but part of the entry was you had to learn all the words to Lydia the Tattooed Lady, which I still remember. But also, just all of you're right. Groucho's personality sort of seeps in and becomes a part of you. I remember when Groucho died, I was working in radio, and he died I think less than a month after Elvis died.
No, within 2 days.
Yeah.
Or 3 days. Elvis died on the 16th of August, Groucho the 19th of August.
Yeah. And in radio, of course, we were all doing Elvis tributes when he died. So when I went on the air, I said, I'm going to do a Groucho tribute. Mm-hmm. So I had the news person set me up with lines. We must increase the tax. Well, you're right. You have to take up the tax before you take up the topic. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did that, and every break I possibly could, because that was my way of giving tribute to him. And I had people calling in saying, "Where are you getting these jokes?" And I said George S. Kaufman, but don't mind. Right. But the personality kind of settles into your bones. Do you find that when you're doing Groucho on the stage?
Well, I've been doing it for so long. It's in me, and I'm not even sure how it happens anymore. I know I have a process of warming up physically a bit and vocally, but it's a process. It's a ritual. As I put on the coat, as I put on, as I do my hair, as I look in that mirror, I realize it's a meditative process that I never really consider. It just is. And by the time I'm out there, I become Groucho once. I start out as Frank Ferrante, and then I become Groucho before the audience, as you know. And then you're shot out of a cannon. And then after the show, I'm Frank again, which I thought was a great idea. That was the director's idea, because there's only one Groucho. I'm giving a fan and actor's interpretation, a filtering. But to answer your question, certainly when I'm on there, I feel that freedom. It's always nerve-wracking before you go on stage. That never goes away, but you find out a way to channel it and use the adrenaline, of course, and put it toward the performance and so forth. But yeah, it's wonderful to be possessed by him. I was just in Philadelphia recently doing the show at the Walnut, a one-nighter. It was packed, even with a storm, and it was a matinee, a 2:00 show, and it was one of my favorite performances. The audience, they all knew it. They know him. They knew him. Were familiar with me. I walked out before I even put the makeup on, and there was this lovely round of applause that just came from acknowledgement of, I guess, my presence there over the years, and that felt great. So that took me into the Grouch. That helped take me even further into the experience, when you realize, oh yeah, we're all here to have a good time. We're around the fire, so my point is, I felt the audience buoys you, the material buoys you, the laughter buoys you, and it all serves the persona of being Groucho. I've avoided him, and I don't. People go, "Oh, you're that way in real life," or it's like, people ask my kids, "Is that your dad? That funny?" He's like, "No," and they kind of go, "Oh yeah, sure he is," but they know better.
Well, now is that a problem? We've heard that from actors before, that they get stereotyped. You've done a wide range of characters on stage. Are you afraid that that everybody will remember you as Groucho and maybe not some of the other characters you've done?
No, not really. At some point, it's a great question, Don. At one point I thought, well, maybe I should stop doing this, maybe 15 years ago. And then I had a really nice compliment and I was looking for a sign at the time. I thought, you know what? I don't want to be just the Groucho guy. But it's changed in 15 years because of this other role I have. This, as I mentioned, multiple roles. But then I got a great compliment from Sean Penn, who said, "Frank, you've got 1 foot in yesterday and 1 foot in today, and you make it all your own." And that was all I needed to hear. In other words, this is yours. You're not an imitator. You're an actor, and keep it going. And he'd seen me in 2 pieces. He saw me do an evening with Groucho, and Sean had seen me do Teatro Zinzani, in which I played this wild Latin lover character, which is in this burlesque dinner cabaret show, which still is playing in Chicago. So he was familiar with the kind of style that I was trying to evoke, which was of a vintage, but still has, I hope, an edge, that it's still dangerous. I'm not a fan of tribute shows per se. I love a good one-person show, whether it's John Leguizamo or Lily Tomlin or Spalding Gray or Bogosian or Anna Devere Smith, and I like the historical solo shows like William Wyndham. I saw it's James Thurber and of course the greatest Hal Holbrook and Twain.
We'll be back to the show in a minute, but now here's the soothing musical interlude.
Frank Ferrante is the recipient of New York's Theatre World Award for Outstanding Debut, a New York Outer Critics Circle nomination, London's Laurence Olivier Award nomination for Comedy Performance of the Year, Washington, D.C.'s Helen Hayes nomination, and 2 Connecticut Critics Circle Awards.
Frank is a mainstay at Philadelphia's historic Walnut Street Theater. Besides that, he has performed lead roles in many of the country's most prominent regional theaters, including Washington, D.C.'s Arena Stage, the Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park, Milwaukee Repertory Theater, Bucks County Playhouse, Pasadena Playhouse, Boston's Huntington Theater, New Jersey's Paper Mill Playhouse, and Atlanta's Alliance.
On television, Frank has appeared as a talking mime in the Emmy Award-winning Children's Hospital for Adult Swim, and he's provided voice work on SpongeBob SquarePants and Garfield and Friends. If you'd like to see him do An Evening with Groucho, please check your local PBS listings, or you can check out Frank online at eveningwithgroucho.com.
And now, more of Frank Ferrante on the musical Innertube. You know, I am very much encouraged by your sense that when people in their 20s get exposed to this and they get on the wavelength, that they like this too. I've watched my kids; they were big fans when they were little because that's what Daddy was watching, so they watched it too and they thought he was funny. They didn't know that his eyebrows weren't real, or his in the early, at least in the early movies, they didn't know that it was grease paint that made the mustache. He grew that in later, right? Mm-hmm. And it makes me feel good to think that that this will keep going. There is something, to me, there is something very deep and eternal about what he and his brothers did. I just think it just goes back to very, very deep well springs of human humor and thought about life.
I'm completely with you, John. And it thrills me too. I'm getting lots of, on social media, I'm hearing from a lot of people, young people, teenagers are loving them too. That's understandable because they are freeing. I think it's a real challenge, the world that we're in. And again, I think they're serving the same purpose as they always have. They free us up and they allow us to escape. And they are dealing with something very core. They are playing outsiders, invading society. We all feel marginalized. We all feel like outsiders. I would say I always feel like I'm not in crowd or hip. And that's what another kind of a miracle of what's going on right now is that there's a certain kind of acceptance that this is still matters and that people should see it, and people who are young should see it. And I'm very proud of that. I find it very moving. It's, as you know, it takes so much to get anything done in anything, in any business. Every time a station comes in that says yes to putting it on, it's a victory for me. Pittsburgh just said yes, yay. Whatever, whoever. And so that matters to me, that there is a life for it, even when I'm gone. And it's a wonderful record of someone who's done a show for a long time. I would like to do it as long as Hal Holbrook did his, which was 62 years. He was working until he was 92. He retired in 2017. He lived another several years after that. But as Hal would say, Hal was steeped for love, steeped in a love for his character, for Mark Twain, as I am for Groucho. And we both feel compelled to share their lives. Whether you're interested or not, we're going to cut through. We're going to, and he'll see. I think he saw it as missionary work. So we go to town to show you how special this person is, and that this might make you feel good. I felt it was a mission when I was in grammar school, putting the movie. You referenced the fact that the movies played when we were kids. Well, there were only 3 channels or 4 channels at the time, and there'd be Marx Brothers Week, or Humphrey Bogart Week, or Mae West Week, or W.C. Fields Week. And in prime time, Monday to Friday, on your local channel, in my case, it was KTLA, Channel 5, you'd be able to see a week of Marx Brothers movies. So you'd see Duck Soup on a Friday night, 11 o'clock at night, you'd see Groucho in his middle years in You Bet Your Life. And then you could catch him in his 80s on a talk show. So you're seeing the 3 ages of Groucho. but it's they're in some ways they're less accessible and more accessible. You can go, obviously you can go online and find clips and so forth, but when there's only 4 channels around and they're playing Marx Brothers on one of those channels for a week, it's going to cut through.
And one of the interesting things about that, though, and about Hal Holbrook going into his 80s to do Mark Twain sort of sat around and talked. Your Groucho runs, jumps, leaps, dances. Are you working your way towards that Groucho I saw standing behind the podium and just giving? I mean, if you do this for a number of years, are you going to have to cut back down on the physical stuff and maybe work your way toward the older Groucho?
It's a great question, Don, and one I've been contemplating for 30 years. I've been blessed with a lot of stamina and a relentless kind of approach to it all, good energy and good health. I am portraying Groucho in his 30s, and I am of the Groucho of the You Bet Your Life age now. So as long as I can keep going and create the illusion of this younger Groucho, fine. But I have thought that as I get older, because I would like to do this when I'm 85, that I'm going to keep rewriting the show. The show gets rewritten constantly. I'll cut stories, I'll cut songs, I'll add stories. A lot of that's the director. I don't know if you've seen the film version of it, but it was the director, Drea Weber, who said, you need to tap more into his passions and interests. The fact that he was a voracious reader. So we have a nice section with talking about his relationship with T.S. Eliot, his correspondence. Yes. And we put in Titwillow by Gilbert and Sullivan because he loved Gilbert and Sullivan. So it shows a different side of Groucho, the fact that he was an intellect, that he kept a dictionary. Groucho kept a dictionary in his glove compartment. Arthur Marx, Groucho's son, told me. I have one of his dictionaries right here in this house. I have one of his encyclopedias. It's insane. So to get back to what you're saying, Don, I think I'm going to have to make some shifts. I mean, I don't know if when I'm 84, I can jump off a stage 4 feet. I mean, I'm feeling it in my feet and my back already, but you know what? I think that energy we'll see. We'll play it out, but I am all open to making adjustments that serve the piece.
For our listeners who may not know about the T.S. Eliot Groucho Marx nexus, they had a sort of pen pal relationship, and they actually had dinner together, at least on one occasion. There's a famous occasion I know that Frank knows better than I do.
I think Groucho says he spent the whole week prior reading everything that Eliot had ever written. He read Murder in the Cathedral 3 times. He read The Wasteland 4 times. But I do tell that story. And Groucho quoted from The Wasteland during the course of the conversation. He goes, Eliot looked at me as though to say he was thoroughly familiar with his poetry. And then Eliot borrowed one of Groucho's lines. And then he looked at him as if he was, and he gave him that look like, okay. And really the bottom line was Groucho said, can you imagine our greatest poet, T.S. Eliot, was more interested in discussing the Marx Brothers in A Night at the Opera and Duck Soup. But what for a poor kid that never made it past the 6th grade, that's another thing. As I get older, I have so much more appreciation for the journey that to come from poverty to, I have a cushion. I mean, I've led a fragmented existence, and I have kids with all my travel. Nothing compares to being 14 years old on the road alone and not knowing if you're going to get home or not, or eat or not, or get food poisoning or be robbed. I mean, he is the product of a rough life, of challenging existence. Whether he knew it or not at the time, who knows? But there was a reason that he was parsimonious. I mean, he lost all his money in the stock market, $250,000 then. So imagine how that translates now. So I have great affection for him, and just, I have access to letters that he wrote to his daughter, and I knew Arthur Marx, his son, extremely well. We were like family, and I knew his daughter Miriam Marx Allen extremely well. They were family. They came over for the holidays. They knew my grandmother. They knew my parents. They knew my aunts and uncles and cousins. So our families were intertwined, and we loved each other. And so I was able to see kind of the product of what it was like, the result of what it was like to be raised by Groucho Marx, and it was a mixed bag, certainly. And you can write a book about that subject matter alone.
Sure.
But I had one kind of lovely moment with Arthur, who had this kind of, I don't like the expression love-hate, but certainly a conflicted relationship with his father. I don't think he ever hated his father. I think he had a hard time comprehending some of his moves, and I'm sure Groucho felt the same way about some of Arthur's decisions. But I was at Arthur's house in Bel Air, and I'm in his backyard, and Groucho was no longer in the ethers. When we loved each other, we were friends apart from our initial connection, which was Groucho inspired. And I'm smoking a cigar, which I rarely do, but we're in his backyard as the sun sets, and then we go inside. I leave the cigar outside. And he goes, "Frank, what are you doing?" So what do you mean? Why don't leave the cigar out there? Well, I don't want to get smoke in the house. No, bring it in. It reminds me of my father. It was such a beautiful 85-year-old Arthur talking about his dad at the time. And I saw him heal in a way and kind of let go. But both of them loved their father. They had a mom who was an alcoholic, and he did a lot. He carried a lot of the burden and responsibility of parenting. And he wasn't a natural parent because he was on the road from the time he was a child. There was not a traditional family structure there.
Yeah. And again, in the Evening with Groucho, you do say there's a space where Groucho delivers a little something about each of his brothers. And it was obvious then. And again, when I saw him, when he was 85 and telling his stories, he told Chico stories and Harpo stories. He loved his brothers. And he was very, very, as he got older and his fame increased with the game show and the other brothers kind of faded a little bit, he didn't want anybody to forget Harpo and Chico. And he made a point of saying how much he loved them.
That's true. I've heard audio of Groucho when he was in his early 80s. And that audio was used, I guess it was bootlegged, was used for the Marx Brothers scrapbook, which is a fairly racy, unfiltered take. And Groucho, in fact, sued over it. But I've heard the audio, and it belies it all in that Groucho's tone is soft. It works. It's works better. It's more. You can consume it in a different way when you hear it. You don't. He says, "I love my father. My father was a gentle man." He talks about his love. I mean, for a son to talk about his dad, you don't expect that, but he uses the word love. And he's asked straight out, "Did you love Chico?" And they were opposites. There was conflict there. Chico once disappeared from a Broadway tour. So there was a lot of that going on. And Groucho was an uptight figure generally, and very dutiful and disciplined, and for the most part, and well in temper behavior. So he says about Chico, of course I love Chico. I love Chico. And it's a beautiful thing. So,
Frank, I know you're going to love this story. I was at a conference about comedy up at the Mohunk many years ago. And the guy who was running the conference asked me if he could seat a woman at our table whom he thought I would love meeting. And it turned out to be Minnie Marx. And no one was talking to her. So he sat her at our table. And it was a good thing for her because I had all sorts of questions and she had all sorts of stories. And one that I had heard elsewhere, she actually was on the set of some of their best movies. And she said for Duck Soup that you could hear summaries of Hitler's speeches on the radio in Los Angeles. And during their breaks, which were many, the brothers would stand around and listen to these and just look at each other. And you could think about, and they obviously hated what they were hearing. And they also knew that they were the targets of what they were hearing, and that they sort of stood in some ways for the opposite, right? For openness, for sort of anarchic abandon, for joyful language, and everybody being equal in comedy. And to hear Hitler calling for the opposite and calling for the extermination of certain peoples it made a big impression on me because, and it did on her too. She said, "I'll never forget it. It's like, the forces of good and evil." Not even knowing that they were engaged.
That was Maxine Marx, Chico's daughter, actually, eldest of the Marx grandchildren. But yes, she because that she was the oldest, she was able to have all these experiences with them like that. But she was on the road with them at times. I think she was brought on stage during Animal Crackers on Broadway. It's funny that I love the lyric that was cut or added, I should say, about Hitler for Lydia the Tattooed Lady when Groucho was entertaining the boys, right? Was doing Bond tours. You know that Lydia, oh Lydia, say, have you met Lydia? Lydia the Tattooed Lady. When she stands, the world grows littler. When she sits on Hitler. Lydia.
I've never heard that. That is so good.
It is.
Littler and Hitler. You got to love it.
Right.
Well, Frank, before we go, you had mentioned earlier about the other character you do, who is in you have to help me out here.
Yeah,
Teatro Zinzani?
Yeah, Teatro Zinzani.
What is that exactly?
It is something that I think since you're both lovers of vaudeville and theater and burlesque, I'm sure, and it is an kind of an elegant vaudeville. It's a cabaret dinner show that takes place under a 100-year-old Spiegel tent, which is a Belgium tent. It has a live band, the best acts from all over the world, and I'm in essence the MC. You've got aerialists, trapeze artists, singers. I've worked with Joan Baez in that show, Sally Kellerman. The Tony Award winner, Lilian Montevecchi of Nine, who was a good friend of mine. So you have these really incredible lead figures, hosts, and then you have some of the greatest acts, literally from Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Australia, you name it. So it's a variety show, but it's in this incredible environment. It's hand-carved wood, stained glass. It's chandeliers. It's all on the round, obviously, and all of the action takes place on this 9-foot diameter. And I play the Caesar, the host for the evening, who is extremely brash and inappropriate and irreverent and loves everything, loves the women, loves men, loves dogs, loves cats, would love a moccasin. So he is this outrageous character that is taken off. So when I play San Francisco, they know me, or I play Seattle, or I play now Chicago. And it was the first show to reopen Teatro Zinzani was the first show to reopen the theater district during the pandemic in July of 2021. I'm very proud of it. I'm the first actor to address an audience. So it's a wildly exhilarating evening. And it's inspired in some way by Groucho in that it's a vaudevillian, that it's as close to a vaudeville as you're going to get, a contemporary version of it.
So there you go. There's two ways that you can see Frank live and in living color. You can see him doing Groucho, and you can see him doing Caesar. I'm assuming that if we go to eveningwithgroucho.com, we'll find your itinerary with Groucho. Where would we find playing for Caesar?
That'll be there too. Everything is on eveningwithgroucho.com, including the broadcast that will be going on for the next 4 to 8 years of the PBS special. So yeah, it's a great resource, and thank you for even mentioning it. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks very much for being with us today, Frank Ferrante. It's been a pleasure, and it is definitely a pleasure to see you in living color, and I hope most people will. And for those of you who can't get out to see Frank on stage, please do tune in that PBS special. You'll get a really, really good idea of what happens when you spend an evening with Groucho. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, John.
Take it easy, Frank. Thanks again.
Oh, we must be going.
How would Groucho go out on that?
Hello, we must be going. We cannot stay. We came to say we must be going. We're glad we came, but just the same, we must be going. La la.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
You can get in touch with us by email. We're at musicalinnertube, that's all one word, at gmail.com.
You can follow us on Twitter at @MInnertube, capitalize the M and I.
Our webpage is Musical Innertube, musical spelled with 2 A's, .libsyn spelled LIBSYN.com.
The Innertube is available on Amazon Music, Facebook, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio podcasts, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Like us, why don't you? And give us a good review on any of those platforms.